So welcome everybody to this panel discussion on diversity and inclusion for the BIM Coordinators Summit. I'm Ralph Montague. I'm the conference chair and also director at ArcDox. Very happy to be here with my fellow colleagues, Megha Nagendra from Sweco, David Shepherd from the House of Commons, and also Rebecca De Cicco from Women in BIM and Aurecon. So guys, do you want to just quickly give everybody a 1 minute who you are introduction, and then we can get talking. Who wants to go first? Rebecca, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Ralph. So again, thanks for obviously having me involved in this important event. Really excited to be part of it. And essentially, my role in industry is obviously I'm the principal of digital enablement for the Aurecon group. And what that means is that I help our clients and partners, implement digital processes, look at, asset-focused information management, and essentially help them in upskilling and, working with them to upskill and develop their requirements for BIM and digital engineering. But I think my love, I was going to say my love job is not really a job, but Women in BIM are created as an industry initiative 10 years ago this year. And Women in BIM is essentially an industry group that looks at driving diversity and inclusion across our digital construction sector, both in the UK, as that's where it was founded, and as now a global initiative with over 60 representatives across the world driving the initiative as regional leads across, over 30 countries, which is just really exciting. So thanks, Ralph.
Yeah, no problem. Megha, you want to go next?
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm Megha, and again, I would say, Ralph, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very much excited not only to be part of the conference, but also this conversation. I come from Sweco. I work as a technical director for information management. My background has been very varied. I originally started off as a teacher for technology, and now I'm working with a design consultant. Of course, delivered many projects X, Y, Z. But if I had to define who I am, I'm a very keen learner, and thanks to this amazing transition the industry is having within the AECO, I've had the opportunity to grow with it. And yeah, here I am. I started as a technician, and I'm a technical director within Sweco right now.
Great. David?
Yes, so my role at the UK House of Commons is BIM project lead, and within that context, my role is to assure the achievement of the key asset outcomes that we require for the parliamentary estate in relation to digital construction and BIM. Also, the RIBA commissioned me to write the BIM Management Handbook, which came out in 2016. I've also been advisor to the Infrastructure and Projects Authority on digital construction. In my spare time, I suppose I could say I'm a Power Apps developer, so very keen on using low-code apps to be able to deliver better information through those mechanisms, and had 3 decades essentially of working in design technology and BIM, and obviously CAD as well. For me, there are pivotal moments that people have in their lives, and although I'm sure bias and discrimination is something that many people experience, for me, the 2 key pivotal moments, which we won't have time to go into in the context of this call, would be obviously the unlawful killing of George Floyd, which to me spurred was a key spurring moment, especially in relation to Black Lives Matter. And then Grenfell Towers, where there was an apparent, in terms of the impact, it was disproportionately towards people of minority ethnic origin. And for me, those events have stirred me to think about how technology and how the industry could be reoriented to ensure a fairer world. So essentially, those are the key drivers for me.
Great, excellent. Well, I think this is going to be a great discussion. It's completely unscripted and unprepared, and which is going to make it very interesting. So maybe before we get going, I just wanted to sort of say why are we having this panel discussion? And I suppose the reason is BIM Coordinators Summit is not just an event. We're trying to be a community. We're trying to bring together a community from around the world of people who are interested in this digital transition of the AEC sector, trying to improve the sector, leveraging technology, and so obviously, as a community that wants to span different regions, and we obviously interested in diversity and inclusion because we want to embrace people of different cultures, different genders, different religions, and etc. And I suppose tap into the wealth of expertise and knowledge that exists across all those diverse groups. So that's probably why we're having this discussion. It's on the one hand, diversity and inclusion seems like an obvious thing. Like, well, of course, why shouldn't you do that? And but I suppose on the other hand, it is a complex issue, isn't it? Because human nature, I suppose, is for people to group and into their sort of cliques of people they feel comfortable with, and even I was thinking about this when I was thinking, what should we talk about? Like, even when we promote the BIM Coordinator Summit, we say things like we want to bring together a group of like-minded people, and even in that statement, we're almost excluding people that are not like-minded, and which is so. On the one hand, you're saying, well, that sounds like a great idea, bring people together of like-minded people, but that's kind of already dividing people into those who think like us and those who don't think like us, and that's, I suppose that's it's kind of a normal thing for people to differentiate and exclude and group, and you always have to do that as a human being, don't you? Because there's so much information in the world that you have
So
to filter,
but the
So
key
maybe,
question there,
yeah,
sorry, Ralph, if
yeah,
I cannot, because there's a difference between naturally, falling into those comfort zones as human beings, because essentially we group ourselves because that's comfort. You know it, so the whether it's the type of a person or the type of skill, whatever we're looking at, and that's how you. So natural grouping versus prejudice,
yeah.
where is the line, and then I think that's where the difference is. Natural
Mm,
grouping is something we do as human beings, but
yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
and I think I was just going to say, I think one of the drivers for I guess the diversity discussion from my personal perspective is that kind of personal experience that I've had in the built environment, and I think many of the people that I interact with that are really keen to effectively implement change across the sector are those that are essentially standing outside of the norm, that want something different, that are looking for that challenge, and that are thinking differently, and I think that the diversity discussion isn't obviously focused on one specific realm. It is based on the different levels of diversity that we can start to enforce in our sector by promoting our industry. Which is a key driver for myself personally, and probably most of the people involved in Women in
Yeah.
BIM.
Mm,
Yeah, think that the hard evidence, because I think very often the first thing that people sort of say, well, yes, but people of all differences experience discrimination in different ways. Hair color might be a source of discrimination, but I think that can operate on an individual level. When we start to look at the broader picture, and this has been done through studies. For instance, the Center for Social Investigation did a study where they issued for 3,200 jobs, a range of applications, but the only changes that they made were to the name of the person, which reflected obviously a different ethnicity, and also the background, so where they might have gained the qualification. But routinely, they required the people who were from certain areas like Nigeria, Pakistan, Bangladesh, required 70% more applications to get a callback compared to white applicants. You can look at things like the pupillage, which is almost an apprenticeship that lawyers do. And even those who excel at the exams and get first-class honours, you find again this great disparity between ethnic minorities who are applying, to the extent that a person can be white and lower qualified and get pupillage before a person who is more qualified, more experienced, and from an ethnic minority. Now, that also, I mean, the statistics also show that that's true in terms of gender bias as well. So this is the hard evidence that we're dealing with, which means that I think there's two dimensions to that. One dimension is to look at what that means for that person's career aspirations. You'll never be a people manager, or if so, it's going to be very temporary because you just will be passed over for that type of role. So you end up being just an individual contributor, but not somebody who is devising and architecting the structure. And I think, you know, when we look at the accomplishments of those on this call, I think it shows that it's required that added effort just to be able to get there. But I think the second one is that there is something called it's almost a what we call a fulfillment of the stereotype. In other words, the person who experiences that starts to set lower aspirations for themselves, and they start to say, well, I'll never be considered for a people management role. And those are things that are playing into the young people who are growing up today and saying, why should I even make the effort? It's clear that my type are not wanted in that particular industry. I know I've said a lot, but I'm just saying that those two seem to be two really important factors.
But I have a very good question coming out of that one, David. So, yes, I think by and large, we're all aware of the prejudices we've faced ourselves for many reasons. But how do we begin to change that mindset within, say, our teams, our businesses, immediate change, so that we can begin to shift that way of thinking? And of course, I mean, Rebecca, you have immense experience, specifically talking with the work with BIM, women in BIM. So I'd love to hear a bit from both of you.
Yeah, so I was going to say, David, that I think I echo your sentiments. I think much of the research that I've done personally, that we've done as a community, is investigate the reasoning as to why. And again, you know, our focus is gender, but, you know, why women that would essentially be qualified for particular roles, be equipped for particular roles, sometimes don't achieve those results or will apply for those roles. And, you know, we often talk about that unconscious bias that exists in the industry, but also the fact that we're essentially self-assessing our competencies lower than we should be, and that's a confidence issue, but it's also a cultural issue, which leads me to one of the initiatives that I was extremely surprised by and very humbled by, was the initiative around the Culture Accord, so the culture in construction in Australia, that I've only seen recently, which is essentially an initiative which is trying to break down the barriers of why, you know, the culture exists the way it does in our industry, and what, you know, how we can essentially use parameters to break that down. Because I don't think it's just about those issues. I think it's about really trying to influence the culture in the way that we, you know, our perceptions and our biases and our views on the way that we live and work, really, right?
So what we've done in Parliament is we have organisations which have been set up in there called Parley Reach, for instance, and Parley Out, in terms of sexual diversity and so on. And out of that, people have been identified within different parts of influential people who are champions. and also mentors. And I think that, again, Women in BIM has been at the forefront of doing this, because very often mentoring helps you to navigate through all of these challenges, especially somebody who has walked the walk already. And also very often that person has may have leverage to be able to influence opportunities and to say, this person, I can vouch for them, give them the opportunity, and I'm sure they'll deliver on it. And I think that's the way. It's another form of networking, and it's the only way to sort of change the culture. So, the three things there: champions, mentoring, and alternative networks, in order to provide those opportunities, would be ways to address that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the
So
mentoring scheme. Sorry, Meg, you first.
No. No, I was just about to say, so within Sweco, interestingly, David, taking from your point, we have seen that too. So I'm part of the mentoring scheme within Sweco, and very similarly, we try to identify champions for different reasons of diversity, if we want to put it that way. And one of the things I'm quite passionate about is dyslexia. So within creative individuals, like we all are within our industry, there are many dyslexics. And however, through the mentoring I've done, I've realized through conversations, there are many who hesitate to even admit the same. It's simply because, typically dyslexics might take twice the amount of time to read a piece of text, or within a conversation take slightly longer to form the sort of, would you say, perceive the conversation. And here I am displaying it to you, but I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with my hesitance. However, a lot of dyslexics aren't, and they and hence recede to the background. And we've had this initiative, and very soon we will be doing a piece during the diversity week, I think it's called, so that we raise awareness that it's fine, because there are so many simple tools that help dyslexics function better. But then within the industry, if you're not able to voice your difference to begin with comfort, then how are you going to find ways to integrate?
There's a question I have, and that's really, how does discrimination against dyslexia surface? In other words, how is it experienced? Is it that?
That's a great question. I could go on for an hour
Yeah,
about that.
but yes, it would be useful, because I think the other forms of discrimination are so overt. If you look at something like gender bias, it's fairly overt in terms of the apparent differences and the way that somebody might behave. Same thing with ethnic bias. I'm just wondering, and I think it's just in a nutshell, because I think it'd be useful for people to understand in terms of neurodiversity what that, just maybe a couple of aspects of that experience, if that's something you can share.
Yeah, I mean, on a personal note, I believe my hesitance and quietness when I first get into conversations with people is misjudged as maybe a lack of knowledge, or a lack of social skills, because that is usually how I am. I get overwhelmed when I meet new people and I'm in new surroundings. But if you get to know me and spend a bit more time, I'm far more insightful than I first come across. So that is one thing. But then also, how does it affect you in terms of your work life? So, say everyone's discussing a topic through emails, through text, through messaging. It is a huge issue for dyslexics, because most dyslexics struggle with running text. So if we were in a group chat and all of you were discussing an amazing idea, and I struggle with this all the time when I'm part of webinars and talks, etc., where I have so much to say about that topic, but the conversation's flipping through so quickly, I can't keep up. I can't. But now what I do is I say, well, I would love to talk about this, and maybe we need to have a conversation, because then I can keep up, because we're talking and we're not writing. But these are the small things, but they're all unsaid, and a lot of dyslexics just suppress. It's almost suppress their
Mask.
yeah,
Mm. But
their
you know, the fact
issues.
that everybody, like everybody has idiosyncrasies and differences,
Yes.
and you know, and I suppose a lot of people listening to this conversation, you might not fall in any sort of obvious bracket, but might feel, like, I feel different to other
Mm.
people, and I don't want to express that difference because then maybe that makes me feel excluded or weak or whatever. But there's so many differences, isn't there, between people? Like everybody's different. Everybody has a different personality. Everybody has a different level of, within the 5 personality traits. Like you can't pigeonhole everybody into categories too easily because everybody
No.
has. But
Um,
in
And
that
I think it
uniqueness, actually,
brings.
there's some treasure as well. So like everybody
But if
has.
I could, sorry, but if I could close that off in terms of, yes, those are my challenges, but I would love to leave that on a positive. So
Mm,
how do you work past those challenges is far more important. Yes, and I believe that's through persistence. Now that I'm thankfully in a place within the business I am in, and in the industry, I would love to just simply impart that persistence, to simply be okay with your own difference, and be comfortable within your knowledge, and the fact that over time you will be able to demonstrate that, and not feel the need to keep up with that race of texts or messages or emails that, and feel like you're not being heard. Persistence is important, just to simply consistently
yeah,
speak up.
yeah, one of the things, and this speaks to Ralph's point as well, which is when I joined Autodesk, I worked with them for 11 years, but when I joined Autodesk the first time, we did something called the Employee Leadership Program. One of the off-site challenges, so you get together, and of course you have these different group exercises, and one of them was the whitewater rafting story. I don't know if any of you have known that, but essentially you're given progressively more information about an accident that happens during a whitewater rafting excursion, and you're having to make decisions as you go along. And myself and one other person, we're very kind of forthright, tend to be a lot more upfront about our opinions and so on. And as a result, we had, in terms of the evaluation of our team, we had massive convergence. We sort of normed very quickly. The only thing is that by the end of the excursion, we were dead. There was one person on that team who was not quite as vociferous as we were. He's a very quiet person, but he actually did whitewater rafting as one of his hobbies. He actually knew what he was talking about, but it was simply because he was being drowned out. And I put my hands up to this, because he was drowned out by the more sort of vociferous people like myself and the other person. That resulted in the failure of our excursion and of obviously our exercise and so on. The point being made there, which is that having leadership that makes space for less vociferous participants, that listens to, diverse, listens to the maverick. That is something that needs to be inculcated, and things like those exercises can very often help leaders to begin to look outside of the norms that tend to be happening, and that sort of groupthink that tends to
Wow.
influence things. Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I
David,
might add. I might just quickly add that I think there's a good conversation around confidence there, because I think all of us at our levels now in our careers have that ability to be able to voice our concerns, voice our opinions, discuss our challenges, etc. But you position yourself, 20 years ago when you're entering the industry, you're very, I don't even know the word, you just don't have enough confidence to be able to integrate as well as you possibly can, even though your ideas are better than someone else's. That level of confidence And that ability to be able to stand up and say, I can do this, is very difficult, regardless of what challenge or what diversity challenge you're faced with. I think where you come from, your gender, your ethnic background, your physical and emotional challenges. I mean, the list goes on. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why I often reinforce each of our team members to have a voice, and to discuss their challenges and discuss their opinions, and
Yeah.
we often have those collaborative discussions.
So, I mean, absolutely echo both of your thoughts there. And just something I would love to add to that is, I think I mentioned this to you, Ralph, within our teams. So why is diversity important? And I always speak to my teams about the fact that our hand, we have 5 different sized fingers, but if we put it together, it's an amazing fist. So it is us, whether we are diverse in terms of culture or diverse within our thinking. And this is how I champion dyslexics as well. Because if you go, read literature about how dyslexics function, our biggest strength is problem solving. We see things in a different way, and hence we are an asset. We might not be able to write you the best, most beautifully illustrated report of an issue we see and how to resolve it, but then that's exactly where another team member comes in, who's great with actually structuring information compared to a dyslexic. But then that is how your teams are formed. And also, just to add to that, even with our approach to how we are representing ourselves as Sweco within the conference, we have everyone from senior management all the way through to a trainee project manager coming to represent Sweco at the event. Because this is, again, a way to inculcate. How do you change the mindset? So you inculcate those behaviors, because how often do you take a trainee project manager to represent the business at a huge event?
Yeah.
I was just
Carry
looking
on,
at.
David. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was just
Sorry,
looking at.
David.
Yeah, I was just looking at some examples of, and I know we've kind of shifted in that direction, but that could be said, for all of the different sort of groups that we've been describing. Just amongst those who have dyslexia: Albert Einstein, Charles Darwin, Winston Churchill, Vincent van Gogh, Picasso, Walt Disney. I mean, I think when people start to see that, they may start to think to themselves, there's an untapped, a massive untapped capability if people who are neurally diverse are being neglected. And it's the same thing when we look at race, as we look at gender, is being able to see that how performance has actually been enhanced. And certainly when I worked at Autodesk, this was something that was intentionally focused on. So there was actually a chief diversity officer who was assigned responsibility and obviously had metrics that they had to target in order to show that things like pay gaps were decreasing, the diversity at different levels of the organization. And I think it comes back to what we know from our industry, is that if you can't measure it, I'm not saying everything is measurable, but if there is nothing you can measure about it, then it's going to be very difficult to improve it. So I think one of the key things, and I'm sure that, for instance, the organizations that we represent, measuring these things is quite important, because we can see how we're performing and improving over time. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Maybe we could
And one
talk a little bit.
sorry, Ralph.
Sorry. No, you carry on.
No, you go.
No, you say your point, because I was going to suggest a next topic, but you carry on
Okay.
first. Finish your point.
I was just going to say that I think one of the things that that we've been investigating recently is the impact of the pandemic and how that's affected the kind of gender divide across all industries, but predominantly how we've been able to address that. And one of the kind of key parameters for the United Nations Sustainability Goals is that gender equality piece, which enforces gender equality across not just our businesses, but in leadership and across governments and all that sort of great stuff. But unfortunately, the numbers are still not proving successful. We still have a real strong issue with trying to get those numbers up. We still have an issue with the gender pay gap, although many companies, as you say, David, are measuring this sort of stuff. Industry as a whole is still not there, right? So and one of the things I often speak about at these types of events is how do we change that, because again, is it a cultural issue? Is it a parameter or a measurement issue? How do we enforce diversity goals across different governments, procurement, etc., etc.? So I think it needs to go deeper than just organizational objectives and organizational measurement.
I think enforcement is going to be the future, and also the ability to see patterns of, in the same way, for instance, if a cartel forms and fixes prices over the course of successive tenders for particular types of works, we've got the ability to use AI to be able to identify those patterns and to be able to screen cartels and identify where cartel-like behavior is happening. Now, you could say that discrimination, which is a form of boycotting, is another type of cartel. The technology and the ability is there. What's missing is that if I form a cartel with, let's say, some other suppliers, and we agree to fix prices and to exclude competitors, I'm going to face legal repercussions for doing that. The difference is that if a cartel forms around race or a cartel forms around gender, there are no legal consequences unless it's a very specific overt act that's happened. And I think that that's where we have to go with this, which is that at some point there are going to have to be sanctions. Now, obviously, nobody likes this idea. Everybody wants sort of let's incentivize rather than punish. But I think at some point, in the same way as we have with health and safety, we don't just incentivize health and safety. We also make it, we apply sanctions for those who aren't running safe construction sites, for instance. And I think at some point we have to think that there have to be consequences. And that means that when, for instance, people are being assessed for a particular job, there should be automatic triggers that show that a more qualified person has been passed over for somebody who's less qualified, and therefore there needs to be heightened scrutiny. I know people, it's going to be costly to implement, they want to run in the opposite direction, but I'm saying that I don't think that this is going to really change much until there are basically legal consequences for discrimination.
Agreed, but that's quite a complex thing as well, isn't it, David? Because it's not only, I mean, it's of course about measuring gender bias, but it's also about understanding where those natural, we spoke at the start of this conversation, how do we naturally get drawn into different roles? And let's be honest about it. Women and men do naturally get drawn into certain roles too. I mean, why are there more women in nursing, for example? Because we naturally get drawn into these nurturing roles, So then the parameters you use to do that measuring and understanding is complex. So you can't apply the same.
And where do
You couldn't say that there has to be
stop as well?
50-50 in terms of,
Like if an introvert gets passed over for an extrovert on a job, like, is that enforceable? If a dyslexic person gets passed over for a normal, whatever you want to call that person, where do you?
I've had that. I've had that, by the way. So in a job interview, I flew through every other aspect. And then it was just I think I was in the third round where it was just an informal chat. And they had everything from a Myers-Briggs test and all sorts of things as part of their interview process. And everything went well. And because I'm quite open and honest about dyslexia, he said, oh, hang on, as part of this job, you'll be writing a whole load of reports. How are you going to be doing that if you're dyslexic? His issue was not that I won't be able to deduce accurately, issues within the project, etc. The issue was I couldn't actually write the report quick enough. So how quickly can you turn around the report was the question. to me, that's shocking, because if you were knowledgeable enough, you would know that dyslexics have tools. So read and write is a very, very common tool. And I say this again to my mentees, that guys, adopt things like that, because often if you're dyslexic, starting from a blank canvas to write is very difficult. But what you can do with a tool like read and write, you simply speak into that tool. It will put all your thoughts down, not in a very formatted manner, onto a digital or a piece of paper, and then you can format that better. And I find that much quicker, you see. And I know I've gone off into a tangent, but the point I'm making here is, yes,
accommodation. So there's a couple of things there which I think apply across the board, because we keep this broad as possible, whether it's to do with gender, which, for instance, somebody wants to have children, does that suddenly exclude them from certain opportunities if a woman wants to have kids and so on? It shouldn't. And I think the more that we give in to those types of justifications, the danger is that we will perpetuate the discrimination and so on. So I think there's two things, right? I'm not suggesting that there's immediate enforcement and legal sanctions. What I'm suggesting is that if there is clearly indicated, shall we say, differences where somebody is more qualified and still gets passed over for somebody less qualified, then what I'm advocating is heightened scrutiny. So there is another layer of scrutiny. Perhaps that's a team that is part of HR, heightened scrutiny of that particular recruitment to ensure that discrimination isn't taking place, and then to address that. So I think that's one aspect of it. The other piece of it is that a lot of these distinctions have been baked into the system. And I give that, for instance, look at STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. What we see is that there is a streaming which makes it a lot easier for males to move into professions that are based on STEM subjects than for women to do so. Now, for instance, in Malaysia, this is reality. In Malaysia, they've dispensed with that streaming. So they're not pushing young people into specific, STEM and non-STEM subjects, and very often that being based on gender. They're actually saying, we're going to do away with that, which will open the door for young people, whether male, female, to be able to go into whatever they want to. I think that if we've got things which are baked into the system, especially in terms of education, we've got to really review that and ask ourselves, is this the right way to do things, if it's only going to result in people who do have an aptitude for STEM subjects finding that they're being discriminated in because women shouldn't be doing this particular type of work, or how many women have you seen doing this type of work, and so on. So there are some things there around, I said heightened scrutiny and also streaming, gender streaming. I don't know if it's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's the opportunity to go too far as well in trying to correct things. I suppose I'm trying to think of an example, but I'm originally from South Africa, so I mean, it was an apartheid country, so there was a sort of an enforced corrective action in the 90s of affirmative action, which basically it's questionable, I suppose, just from somebody. I mean, I've moved away from South Africa 20 years ago, but from somebody sitting on the outside now, looking back at South Africa, whether that actually had a positive result in general. Maybe it had a positive result for certain people, but putting people into positions not because of their ability, but because of under affirmative action, because of their race, to correct a previous wrong. It's. I mean, some of these efforts could go too far. I mean, I suppose it's
So there's a couple of things
I'm asking. Maybe I don't know.
No, it's a valid point. And what I'd push out there is okay. So the focus should be equality of opportunity, and
Yeah.
that should be based on capability and merit. The challenge you have is that if, as the case in South Africa is case in point, people have been denied access to a certain level of education, but you're still trying to redress that imbalance, then you're having to then think more strategically and long term in terms of how do you address that in terms of education if people have not had access to that level of education. Then foreseeably you're saying that maybe 2 generations down you won't be able to redress that, because you'll constantly be saying, but this group of people who actually went through centuries of affirmative action themselves and were privileged as a result of that, they're still the most qualified people to do the job. And this set of people who were deprived as a result of that apartheid affirmative action, well, we're just going to have to wait for a new crop of young people who are sufficiently educated to then compete for the jobs and then say, oh, I'm good enough, I'm the best person for the job, and therefore I did it on merit. I think that what ends up happening is that I think there is a case for affirmative action. But my issue is more with the quota-based system. I think that's the issue, is where we are simply just trying to make up numbers which say that we now have this percentage of women in management positions, but not necessarily the quality that we're looking for, and so on. And that's where mentoring comes in, because mentoring says this is not just a quick fix to be able to look at the numbers and say we've got the right proportions. Instead, we're saying we are going to fast track and put those who have been deprived of these opportunities into a process that will enable them to compete in those roles and to be able to gain those roles, which might be different from maybe the situation in South Africa. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's
and one of the
equality of
things.
opportunity versus equality of outcome. I mean, I think that's
Mm.
yes. Yeah, so there's groups of people who are expecting the same outcome without, not necessarily having the same opportunity. But so I think that's a good point you made there, David. Is we're really striving for equality of opportunity. We like it, different people will take up the opportunity. Everyone is given the potential and the opportunity, but not everybody will take up that opportunity to the same degree, and that's just part of life. I mean, some people are more eager and keen and are willing to invest more time and go for it, and some people are challenged because of differences, whatever those differences are, whether those are physical differences, mental differences, race or gender differences. And obviously, if you have those differences, you have a different challenge. But I think everyone has a challenge, of some degree, and
Yeah.
you've got to work within those parameters.
One of the
So,
things we've, sorry, David, one of the things that we've, I guess, outside of Women in BIM, more so strategically in most of the organizations that I've worked for, is trying to um, almost identify the people in the business that have those unique skills. And by doing that, what we do is we develop kind of tailored parameters or assessment criteria to be able to push out to our people to then be able to assess, okay, if we talk about BIM and the digital construction methodologies and all of that sort of stuff, how do we find the champions in the business that we can elevate without knowing what their level of skill are? Using, and most companies do it. They use a method of self-assessment. I can do this, I will do this, I am capable of doing this, without actually having, the kind of metrics to back it up. And again, I think the more we move into this kind of digital space in the built environment, the more so we're going to be forced to be able to kind of prove our worth. What is it that we can do, and how do we promote ourselves in our businesses, and use those skills to promote ourselves in our businesses with a dedicated, I don't know, data-driven approach, I guess.
Yeah.
Because
And
it's so
if I
important.
can add to that,
Yep.
Rebecca,
Mm.
here's where a topic for another day, but learning management systems. So how do you actually measure, capture, capabilities within your business on an individual level. So what are those parameters? If you are going to do this using digital technology, and also be able to set learning pathways for individuals based on their baselines, because you might have 3, 4, 5 BIM leads working on different projects, but you are so right, specifically because of the gaps in knowledge that has developed within the industry due to the way adoption has happened within the industry, within digital engineering and BIM. There are gaps. So, however,
Absolutely.
learning management systems, and I would love to know more about how you go about within what you're doing, identifying those levels of,
Yeah.
an
Competence.
understanding,
It
competence.
aligns to the diversity discussion because we are finding that, like it or not, those of ethnic minorities or obviously women are self-assessing. They have lower expectations of their abilities, which comes from culture, which comes from obviously their environments and their backgrounds and all of that sort of stuff. And that's a real problem. And I've seen that across multiple organizations that I've been working with in regard to how they identify champions. And again, which is something that I think I take pride in, is setting up these parameters for using, data centric measurement tools to be able to pull out, where the champions are. And they may be in these minorities, and they generally are, believe it or not. Which I think we know. But yeah, I think that's something that I've been trying to encourage essentially across the businesses that
Yeah.
I've worked with and the
And
clients I've
also,
worked for.
and the key aspect of that is those individuals are not natural leaders, but in fact,
Yeah.
they have all of the skills to be able to impart quick change in projects, in methodology, etc. But because they are not natural leaders, you never seem to see them. And it's funny you say that, because quite recently I had that conversation with someone saying that, hey guys, these people, we need to pull them out to what they're doing and give them an opportunity to be leading, because they'll make change. But also, leadership skills can be taught, sorry, whereas that natural aptitude and way of learning, if you like, within digital technology is not something you can naturally you can teach. You can't impart that easily, but you can
One,
impart leadership easily.
Maybe we could
well,
spend the next few minutes,
yeah.
just because we're coming to the end of the hour, but just talking
Wow.
about a step forward. I mean, I love this quote from Buckminster Fuller, was an architect, but he said that you never change things by fighting the existing reality. If you want to change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So in that sort of vein, and like what we're trying to do as a community, maybe each of you could just sort of paint a picture, in the closing minutes of what a future might look like, or some, even impart some sort of positive encouragement to people to, we've already said it, I think, to embrace their differences and and to seize opportunities and etc. But maybe each of you just want to give a comment on, like, what does a different model look like from your perspective? For the industry, for the community.
Yes, I mean, I'll jump in here. For me, a different model is very much, if some of you are aware of the Fiverr platform, essentially, these are technical people who are all over the world, and their skill set can be drawn upon, whether it's programming, different ways of leadership and so on. And I think that model is the one that's more sustainable than this idea that we have to constantly leverage very confined and sort of limited resources, whether that's because we've defined that limitation as being, male, or being of a particular ethnic group, or being of a particular, neural mindset. That those kinds of things are starting to evaporate. So I think that that's where the future is. Just one thing.
Can I clarify that, David? Is it?
Yep.
Are you kind of saying you're employing the skill that's needed rather than employing a person and then trying to shoehorn them into a skill?
Well, yes.
More or less
And this has been the case with a lot of the software development work that I've been doing, which has tapped into people who have specific skill sets and have been able to do that. And I think people are building confidence to be able to impart their expertise to multiple projects. And I think this is part of the post-COVID world, that people, if they have that skill and that expertise and it's sufficient for them to make a decent living, they don't necessarily want to be sort of working their way through corporate hierarchies to be able to get to the quality of life that they want to. And I think when you look at the membership of the, when you've displayed that, in terms of the thousands from different parts of the world who will be part of this BIM Coordinators Summit, certainly I think that this is going to be the future, and that's going to be a different way of working than maybe the very sort of hierarchical corporate setup. I think that the two will coexist, but it will grant more opportunity to people who are outside of those corporate hierarchies.
Yeah, I second that, David. And I think one of the things we've been speaking about rather for a number of years is the fact that the methodology around it's, again, I bring it back to procurement and culture in construction, is that that those methods and those kind of old school antiquated tools to measure capability, to be able to procure resources across the industry, will come from the skills that are enabled, or that occur, or that exist across the industry, rather than the organizations that are promoting those skills. Because I think it's naive to state that one organization can essentially fulfill what our clients are looking for. Having said that, I think, obviously there's an uptake of, joint ventures and all that sort of great stuff that's happening now. But for me personally and professionally, the future for, for the industry, it must change. I mean, again, the number of women leaving the industry, the number of women not entering the industry, the number of women needing support, all aligned to the core ambitions of what we're trying to do for women in BIM. And I think we've mentioned the mentoring scheme multiple times, but we need men and women to be supporting this initiative, and we need, obviously a good mix of different cultures and backgrounds and groups of people to support. So the future for me looks positive if we have, those people in place to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very well put, both of you. And yeah, to summarize that, I would like to talk about more on a individual level. So how do we make that change within our businesses and bring about that change? Because it reminds me of a saying. Well, I think in English it's known as every drop makes an ocean, but then there's a variant of that within my language, which again goes back to the whole concept of, if we can change one person's approach, one person's view of this on an individual level, it does add up to the bigger picture, that change within the industry we would like to see. And I'm sure we all have done that. And however, what I would like is for us to unify those approaches across businesses. So we spoke about alliance. Rebecca, you just spoke about how many projects now are delivered across alliances, because we see that skills sit in different businesses. So we pull them together. We do something quite similar with the work we're doing for the British Antarctic Survey Station. But yes, very true. But that can be extended towards the softer skills as well, towards the people side of it. And again, through the work we're doing with BAS, it's been an absolute eye-opener, because there is such a human aspect to it, that focusing on our softer skills, understanding how we actually tick, not just as technically minded individuals, but also on a human level, and factoring that in and bringing that balance, I suppose, will go towards removing the biases. Because if I know you on a human level, that, oh, actually, yeah, Megha's a bit dyslexic. She does sometimes stutter when she's trying to get a point across, for example. And if I knew your idiosyncrasies, you're more accepting. So on a one-to-one level, I believe. And within these great alliances that we use to deliver projects, if we do inculcate that, a mechanism of introducing these, team building exercises, I suppose. So talking on a micro level.
So if I could summarize on the diversity thing, it's getting down to recognizing the value of the individual, like what the individual has to contribute within their idiosyncrasies, etc. Rather than trying to group people into, like everybody has to be the same. So I think that would be a key message for me coming out of this is everybody doesn't have to be the same. Like you can be yourself, and within being yourself, there is some value maybe yet to be discovered by yourself and others, but there is a value that you have something to contribute as the individual, and you need to maybe recognize it in yourself, and you maybe have to help others recognize it as well. That's probably part of the challenge. But I think that's probably, and that's one of the things we're really trying to do with this organization is we're really trying to recognize people who are doing great work. So and celebrate. So part of our mission, I suppose, is just to celebrate what people are doing and to recognize what people are doing and to appreciate what people are doing at the individual level. And I think that as a diversity message is it's okay to be different. Actually,
Thanks,
it's brilliant.
Ralph.
It's brilliant to be different because it's the difference that adds the value, to whatever community you're operating in.
Yeah, on a lighter note, it's like when you go to a fest, in London, with all of the different foods from different countries and everything in one place, and the music and the food, and you have the best experience. You come away feeling so happy and elated, and that's because of that vibrance and the difference that you're experiencing, in a completely different way, of course.
Great.
Just,
One
just as
final
an,
word of encouragement from each of you for the community. Just what would you like people to, in one sentence, like what would you
Well,
like
I
them
always
to
say
come away with?
just be, I mean, I heard that ages ago. Just be yourself. Don't hesitate to be yourself. Show your difference. It's something, worth celebrating. The differences are worth celebrating.
that would be for me the key thing. Looking at this summit, I think, and just looking across these different speakers and seeing how diverse they are, this is a cause for celebration. I think we need to celebrate and see this almost as a festival of BIM. So my final word would be to celebrate and realize this represents, I think this summit is so crucial because it represents what the future really is going to look like.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I second everything that everyone's saying, and I think from my perspective, both personally and professionally, it's just embrace the change, and go along with the ride because, all of the data suggests that the industry is moving very quickly, and we're all running to keep up with it. So, embrace that change, enjoy the challenge, and obviously, educate yourself.
And also put your hand up when you don't know things.
Yeah,
Just say,
absolutely.
"Hang on, I don't understand that. Can you
I do
tell
that a
me?"
lot.
you know?
Yeah,
Yeah, me too. All the
totally.
time.
So
So,
my final word is it's an honor for me to speak to the three of you. Like all three of you, in your own way, are making incredible efforts to advance this idea of diversity and inclusion. So I really want to appreciate that and recognize that and celebrate that. And it's for me to be included in this conversation with the three of you has been fantastic. I think it's been a great conversation. It's a great message. I mean, we could obviously talk for another couple of hours, I'm sure, but I'm happy that we got it on the agenda and that we're going to keep pushing this message within the community. So thank you all for your
Thanks, Ralph.
time, and look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks
Ralph.
for having
And
us.
Everybody.
thanks for having
Good.
us. Yeah.